joining us this evening as we start our first panel discussion that we're calling PMS, Politics, Money, and Social Justice. We have a great night planned and a great discussion that we will have about politics, and we have great panelists who will be with us. As you know, this is an election year, and it's a very pivotal year. And so this is a conversation to address the issues that we're in as we deal with our country, even the world, in the middle of a pandemic. And our homes have literally become everything to us. It has become our place of business. It has become our place of worship. It has become our place of rest, and now it has become a place of education where we're educating our children. And so we're all handling the stress of that, navigating during this time. And we are here to discuss the issues at hand. So before we get into the conversation, I want you to do me a favor. I want you to share this. I want you to just press the share button at the bottom of your screen. Let your family and your friends know that we're on right now and that we have a great panel discussion ahead of us. Also, I would like to introduce everyone who is with us today, and I want to introduce our panelists. First, I would like to introduce pretty much everyone here doesn't need an introduction, but I will be formal in this. We will first start with Representative James Clyburn, who is a native of Sumter, South Carolina. He is the majority whip and the third-ranking Democrat in the United States House of Representatives. He currently serves as the chairman of the House Select Committee on the Coronavirus Crisis, and he's also the chairman of the Rural Broadband Task Force and Democratic Faith Working Group. And so we want to thank Mr. and Representative James Clyburn for being with us this evening. Next, we have Mayor Steve Benjamin, who was elected as mayor of Columbia in 2010 in April. He has made his mission to create Columbia the most talented, educated, and entrepreneurial city in America. Mayor Benjamin has won several awards and serves as the president of the U.S. Conference of Mayors and as the chairman of the Municipal Bonds of America. We also have Antoine Seawright, who is the president and CEO of Blueprint Strategy. He's also a CBS News political contributor. He's a senior advisor, Democratic Campaign Congressional Committee. He's a Democratic National. He also serves on the Democratic National Committee and the South Carolina Senate Democratic Caucus. He also writes for BuzzFeed News and TheHill.com. And finally, we have a native of Orangeburg who is running for a Senate seat this year, Jamie Harrison, who is a graduate of Yale University and Georgetown Law. In 2013, Jamie was elected the first African-American chair of the South Carolina Democratic Party, a position he held until 2017, and now he's running for U.S. Senate to fight for equal opportunities for South Carolinians. Do you mind just shouting out in the comment section, giving a shout out to all of our panelists? Before we get into this, I want to let everyone know that we want to ask questions that deal with the everyday American, the everyday citizen. And so we have some questions, and I want to start off by asking Antoine this first question, and it is this. Why is it important for Black men to be engaged during this election, and what will it take to get them connected?
Well, thank you, Pastor, for having me, and thanks to the whip, Jamie, of course, my mayor, for being alongside with all this. Elections are about coalitions and constituencies. I've always believed that. 13% of Black men voted for the biggest threat, I think, to the American experiment by the name of Donald Trump in 2016. If we do not have that type of coalition or constituency, in my view, the most consequential constituency in a generation, vote against Donald Trump and vote for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, we will be repeating the sins of 2016. African-American men have always been seen as part of the nerve center for every community, every household, and every family. And I don't think this election brings about anything differently. When you think about the issues that matter to all of us, the things that we all believe should work for all of us, healthcare, infrastructure, education, access to the American experiment, African-American men have always played a key role in unlocking that potential for all of us. And so that's why it's important for African-American men to be at the table and not on the menu.
Thanks. With that Mayor Benjamin, would you have anything that you would add to what Antoine has just said?
You know, it's amazing. Obviously, I always love hearing my little brother do his thing. I can think of a year ago, as the presidential primary was beginning to unfold and folks were stepping in. Antoine Sierra was saying the same thing, that black men would be the deciding factor in this election. I really want to thank you, Pastor, for pulling us all together to talk about these incredible issues. You know, the reality is that, you know, we are facing the greatest pandemic since 1918, the greatest economic disruption in an election year since 1932 or maybe 1876. I'll leave that to Congressman Clyburn. He's our resident historian. And the greatest social unrest around police violence and structural racism since 1968. All three of those wrapped up into 2 quarters in 2020 under Donald Trump. And each and every one of those individually and certainly collectively represent existential threats to people of color, black people, and particularly black men in this country. This is a time where, as we have historically, it's time for black men to step up and stand up and make sure that our voices are heard in these times. These are particularly precarious times for all of us, and the data will show more precarious for black men than any other souls here in the United States of America.
Thank you. Representative Clyburn, a question for you. How do you think we get our black men connected in understanding the importance of just not voting for voting on the right side?
Well, thank you very much, Pastor, for this evening, and thanks to all the other participants here. So let me just say a couple of things about that. Maya Angelou said something some time ago that I think is very, very apropos. When a person shows you who they are, believe them the first time. Now, I'm a father of 3 daughters. I have 2 granddaughters. When I sat in front of my TV and saw the current president look in the camera and refer to a black woman who had been a member of his staff as a dog, I don't understand any black man not understanding that that's disrespectful. Anybody, black or white, it can be of a black woman. And to me, that says it all. Now, I can talk about the politics, I can talk about the policies and all of that, but I was done at that moment. And so I would say to any black male today, this man has shown you who and what he is. Believe him. Don't think about what he says, but what he does. And when he referred to the countries of the motherland from which all of us came, our parents, our grandparents, as S-hole countries, he is showing you who and what he is. And so it doesn't take anything from me or anybody else. Just believe him the first time. And if you don't believe him the first time, listen the second time and the third time, because he continues to show us who and what he is. And now he is rounded it off by saying to voting white people, they are coming to ruin your suburbs. Believe him, if not the first time and the second time, please believe him the third time.
Thank you so much. There are so many things that's going on just in the state of South Carolina alone, and there are a lot of important issues facing our state. Mr. Harrison, I want to point this direction to you. What are the most important issues facing South Carolina specifically, and even on a local level, that you think should be addressed in this election?
Well, thank you so much for having me again, Pastor. And it's always good to be on with my brothers and also my political father, Jim Clyburn. There are a lot of issues right now that folks are dealing with, but, one that in particular I want to drill down on, Pastor, and that's rural health care. we're in the midst of a global pandemic that is threatening our economy and our health. Our rural counties and towns have been some of the hardest hits during these very, very troubling times. You know, right here in South Carolina, more than 75% of hospital beds are occupied in about 15 counties. And it's clear to me that our state just isn't ready to deal with the coronavirus. And that's with, you know, and I'm saying this because I know Steve Benjamin is ready, because I know the leadership that he's been doing each and every day. But despite his efforts, despite the efforts that we see in Charleston, the state as a whole is just not ready. And even before the pandemic started, South Carolina's healthcare, particularly in the rural communities, has been stretched thin. 4 of our rural hospitals have closed in the past few years. 8 counties right now don't have a general hospital to speak of. Just 2 years ago, 14 of our 46 counties had no OBGYNs. And I'm going to say that again. 2 years ago, 14 of our 46 counties had no OBGYNs. So if rural South Carolinians can get past those barriers to healthcare, they still have to face the obstacles in terms of receiving adequate treatment. In fact, more than 1 in 5 South Carolina adults live in rural areas of the state have no health insurance. None. Right now, South Carolina is one of 12 states. 38 other states have passed Medicaid expansion, but South Carolina is one of 12 states that still refuses to expand Medicaid in the state. Almost 214,000 people should have health care in this state, and if they lived in 38 other states, they would. And so the big issue is, and then don't get me or the Congressman Clyburn started on rural broadband, which is the infrastructure of the 21st century. And when we have almost 500,000 people here who don't have access to the internet. And what do you do when you are in the midst of a pandemic where you got to work from home and educate your kids from home? When that statistic came out that said 17,000 kids hadn't been in contact with their school system since March, I almost dropped in my seat. This is what we are dealing with. What we are dealing with is not just these issues, but feckless leadership. Feckless leadership coming from the governor's house to the United States Senate. And we need some help for Steve Benjamin. We need some help for Congressman Jim Clyburn to make sure that we are fighting for all of us here in South Carolina, not just a select few. And those are the issues, Pastor, that people are dealing with on a day-to-day basis. And we need some folks with some solutions and not just talking points.
Thank you so much. I've always wondered when we, as a pastor, during the time where you have officials to start, or those who are running for an office to come to the church, and they go to different churches to let the community know that they're running, which is understandable. I understand it because visibility is important. However, I would say this, that there has to be a connection between the spiritual leadership or pastors in the community and political officials. And what has a tendency to happen is that we have the parade of, hey, I'm running for office, but not always reaching back to that community and to those leaders to say, hey, what is really going on in the community? And it's not everyone, but you have a tendency to, I've seen, to forget that. And I think sometimes the community may feel like we vote people into office, and then when they get there, they forget about us. And I see you nodding your head. So what do you want to say to that, Antoine?
Well, I want to say that it's about relationships. And the most effective piece to a relationship is communication. And so once the person gets there, then it becomes accountability. But we can talk about all the issues in the world, but you cannot govern if you do not win, and losers do not legislate. And what I do know, as a 5th generation AME, is that the church has always been the linchpin between community and the political agenda, particularly as it relates to the impact it has on communities that look like ours. And so it is not uncommon for strategy to happen at the church that will have greater impact on the church. But what I do know is during those days, the days I heard about growing up, is there was an accountability factor. So if the mayor wasn't doing his job, he would get a call from the pastor and say, come by my office and let's have a little talk. let's have a little walk with Jesus to make sure everything is all right. And when that wasn't the case, you can best believe there was somebody showing up at the council meeting, showing up at the voting booth to vote against them. It's a transparency thing, but it's also an accountability factor, and it takes two things to make it go right.
And I agree with you. And we have to do better keeping those who are in office accountable. And this is why I'll come back to you, Mr. Harrison. You're running for office. And I heard your heart on health care and the things that are going in the rural areas of South Carolina, even in some of our urban areas, to hear that 17,000 students didn't have broadband internet. And I know Representative Clyburn has been working with that. I remember talking to him a few months ago before the pandemic about the things he was trying to do and the importance of having that infrastructure. But you're running against someone who's been in office for a while. What do you think you bring to the table that's different than what's already been?
Well, Pastor, part of it is my life story, which is the story of so many, particularly in the African American community, young boys and young girls right now. You know, I was born in Orangeburg, South Carolina, the son of a teen mom. My mom was 16 years old when she had me. I was raised by my grandparents. My grandma had an 8th grade education because she had to quit school to go pick cotton. And then she worked in the textile plants and she did domestic work. My grandfather quit school in 4th grade. He worked at a dairy and then he did construction most of his life. And so these are two of the hardest working people I've ever met in my life. They didn't have much education, didn't have much money, but what they were rich in were their values. And they taught me the value of hard work and helping other people. So it was that and those opportunities, but also the hope and the faith that they had that I could go on to do bigger and better things. And meeting great people like Jim Clyburn, who put me up on his shoulders. Well, you know, so I always had that little flicker and that flame in my eye, Pastor, in terms of that things would get better and that I could live the American dream. But as I go across the state of South Carolina right now, and I go and talk to young boys and young girls in these communities, and I talk to their parents, that little flame that I had in my eye, I don't see in theirs. They don't have any hope because things are tough right now. When you go to schools they're falling apart, when you live in communities where there's no economic opportunity, there's no jobs, the water that's coming out of your spigot is brown as my shoes. When you live in places where there's no grocery store, when you live in places where people don't have any high aspirations or hopes or dreams that you're going to be better. That is the current situation that we have in South Carolina, and that should not be. We have to bring hope back to these communities. And what do I mean by hope? That means rebuilding and revitalizing the communities that these folks live in. That they've been trapped in a cycle of poverty for generations after generations after generations. And there's somebody that has to stand up and be a leader. For far too long, it's only been Jim Clyburn playing that role on the federal level. Well, Clyburn needs some help. It can't just be him. Because when he passes a bipartisan bill to close the Charleston loophole to make sure that what happened in Charleston never happens again, and it passes the House, it has to go to the Senate. But there's somebody in the Senate that has to take that bill up and push for it just as hard as he pushed for it in the House. But we don't have that somebody right now. When Jim Clyburn talks about bringing broadband to South Carolina, we need somebody in the Senate that can offer that companion bill to do just that. Not having a senator like Lindsey Graham who just walked out of the meeting and said, oh, I guess broadband is important. Well, yes, Senator, it is important. And it's been important for a long time. And it's not just important because in this election time, it's important because that's a part of the necessity that people need. So my agenda, Pastor, is about bringing hope. I want to make sure that all the other little round-headed boys and girls growing up in South Carolina, just like me, get the opportunity to live the American dream the same way that I've been able to. And if success for me, relevance for me, is just that, making sure that flame of hope that was in my eyes, that is once again in the eyes of these young boys and young girls in this state.
Thank you. You know, you brought up a very important point as relates to things that's been going on for a while. Recently, in the middle of the pandemic, all of us, especially in Northeast Columbia, I can speak specifically, we had some issues during this past election. What I call voter complication, other people call voter suppression. where they were they were closing places that you would normally vote. People were confused on where they were going. Names were on the ballots. They didn't have enough volunteers. You had people standing in line 4 and 5 hours. You had people cutting off traffic. It was a nightmare. Mayor Benjamin.
Blame the mayor.
I'm not even blaming you. I'm not even blaming you. What I do want to know is, and I know you work in the city, but what measures are we putting in place for those who are listening to help with what's going to happen in November?
I do appreciate that caveat. The city does not run elections, okay? But I know that all four of your guests tonight have had deep and detailed discussions with our state elections commission and our Richland County Elections Commission. New director, Ms. Stevens, who's on board. We had a meeting with her just over a couple weeks ago, just trying to make sure we were doing everything we possibly could to assist with making sure that the elections are run smoothly. Because while we've all dealt with and fought, I've been on the phone with everyone in this room during elections trying to stop voter suppression issues, but we have seen nothing like what we're going to see this year. The very strategic voter suppression efforts, just being frank, that the Trump campaign and the RNC are engaged in is unlike anything we've ever seen before. The importance of making sure our traditional operations are in place, and Richland County is opening up all of those polling places again. So the places that people have historically gone to vote plan to go back there and vote again. The machines are in place, the protections are in place to protect you from the coronavirus, and obviously all the opportunities to vote early are also in play. It's important to note that the strategic efforts trying to stop citizens from having access to the ballot, again, are going to be unlike anything we've ever seen. It's interesting this year, of course, because the majority of Republicans plan to vote on Election Day. A significant number, and a majority, depending on the state you're in, of folks who may not be voting Republican plan to vote by mail or early vote or what have you. So you're going to see some significant and strategic efforts. Read about them every single day. If it's actually messing with postal office operations or challenging ballots or trying to deny people access to their traditional polling places, the goal is to try and freeze on Election Day the results as of those people who actually show up at the polls, when we know that a record number of Americans will vote by mail this election cycle. And it's going to be our job, our collective job, to make sure we shape the narrative. It's not just Election Day. It may not just be Election Week. We're going to have to do every single thing we possibly can to make sure that every ballot is counted, that the blood, sweat, and tears of men and women who've come before us, who've laid down their lives literally for us to have an opportunity to participate in this American experiment, that every vote's counted. And it's going to be tactically more challenging than it ever has before. I know when Jim Clyburn was elected with was arrested with 186 of his colleagues in what became the great Edwards versus South Carolina decision. They were fighting for rights that they thought we wouldn't still have to be fighting for in 2020. That case decided in 1963. But I think even the congressman would suggest that what we're dealing with right now is a much more dangerous devil than we've had to deal with in the last 100 years. We're going to have to step our game up.
I appreciate that. For those who are watching, if you have any questions, what you can do is post those questions or ask your questions in the comment section, and we will try to get to those or get to as many questions as we can. So make sure if you have any questions, make sure you put that in the comment section. Representative Clyburn, as Mayor Benjamin has just talked about dealing with voter suppression, dealing with all of the things that is happening, it's very important that we understand not only the local issues that Mr. Harrison talked about, but understanding it from a national level. Can you share with us the national impact of this particular election?
Oh, yes. Thank you so much. And let me congratulate Mayor Benjamin once again. You know, I am so pleased with the way he's been running the city of Columbia and the recognition of the foundations upon which what he's doing that have been built, and giving honor to the Sarah Mae Flemings and all who never got their rightful place in history. Mayor Benjamin is just doing a great job with that, and I appreciate it. But when it comes to the national level, let me tell you, the best hope for the future right now is getting beyond this pandemic. And you cannot do that without national leadership. You cannot have a state by state by state approach to solving a healthcare crisis that is causing a tremendous economic crisis that is perpetuating a real housing crisis. You cannot do that state by state. Jimmy just pointed out that South Carolina is one of 12 states that refuses to expand Medicaid. That means that people from South Carolina, if they move to a few other states, interesting, they can move to Kentucky and get better health care than they get in South Carolina. Move to Arkansas and get better health care because those governments, as southern as they are, in fact, down there in Arkansas, don't even have any Democrat in their federal, in the House or the Senate. In Kentucky, only one. So why is it in South Carolina we want to expand Medicaid? It's a national program put in place that will help people of low income, not just of low income, but look, you can be middle income or upper income because Medicaid is where nursing homes are funded. And so South Carolina is putting people, all people, not just poor people, but middle income people. And I'm gonna tell you something. I went through that with my mother-in-law when we needed to put her in a nursing home. And I found out how much it cost without the help of Medicaid. So nationally, these programs, no matter what we do, if the state is not willing to accept it and do their part, nothing happens. That's what's going on now. We are up here now trying to pass legislation to do more for COVID-19. We cannot do any more because they are refusing to allow state and local governments to get help. Mayor Benjamin runs a local government very efficiently. So why are we penalizing the city of Columbia because somebody may not like what's going on up in New York? So we won't pass any state and local stuff because we've got an administration that's upset with New York, upset with New Jersey, and always refer to them as a blue state rather than as Americans, need assistance, and we're penalizing the city of Columbia. That's the kind of idiotic leadership we've got today. We need to put people in place who understand that government is about service. And I'll close with this. Just look at what they're doing to the post office. It is called the United States Postal Service. I tell people all the time, if anybody come to you and tell you you should vote for them because they want to make sure that government is run like a business, stay away from them. Because government is not a business. Government is a service. Businesses exist to make profit. And if you ever start running government to make a profit, somebody is going to jail.
Thank you so much, Representative Clyburn. We have a question here, and I'm going to just throw it out and any one of you can answer. The question is, how can we best mobilize younger and first-time voters during this election? Who wants to go first?
Well, we have to meet them where they are. As I talked about earlier, elections are about coalitions and constituencies. When Bill Clinton won twice, it's because young people showed up to vote. When Barack Obama won twice, it's because part of the coalition it took to win was fueled by young voters. The truth be told, millennial voters will be the largest voting bloc in this country in this election. If they do not show up and vote for us, we will not win. Now, the challenge for that is for us as messengers on the message is to meet them where they are. They may not identify with getting a piece of mail, but they can identify with getting a text message on their phone, as I get 3 or 4 a day from Jamie Harrison. They may not
All asking for money. All.
they may not identify with a rural stump meeting, but they can identify with a happy hour. They can identify with somebody coming to their college campus. They can identify with some of the stars, the LeBrons, the A.J. Wilsons, the Simeon Moultries. They can identify with people who have what I call a platform to reach them where they are. And the truth be told, we've not done a good enough job, as my grandmother would say, of talking about issues that matter to them on their level. We've got to start talking about student loan debt. We've got to start talking about wages and jobs and access to health care as it relates to younger voters. And that's no disrespect to the more seasoned voters. Notice I did not say old, I said seasoned. There's no disrespect to them, but we have to start meeting people where they are.
Why'd you point at me? Why'd you point at me with that one? I had black hair like you when I started this thing. Jim didn't tell me it was going to be like this. I got all gray now.
No, but I appreciate it. And someone else who actually asked the question says, how do we, the question is, how can we win the election early? What is the strategy for October? Because we can't wait until November.
Clyburn.
Mr. Clyburn, I'll let you have that.
Thank you so much for letting me get.
I knew you would like that one. You about to steal my talking points.
Let me say to Antoine. Antoine, you're in a mighty big club. You're getting all these texts from Jimmy. Today about texts from Jimmy. So let me just say a couple things. November 3rd is election day. But we know, you just heard from Mayor Benjamin, the vast majority of the people on the other side said they're going to vote on election day. The vast majority of the people on our side said they're going to vote by mail. And we see what they're doing to the post office, trying to disrupt the mail in order to suppress the vote. So we are urging people to make October election month. November 3rd is election day. Let's make October election month. Because in South Carolina, and I understand in Richland County alone, we're going to have 8 to 10 satellite places that people can vote during the month of October. So let's, on October 5th, that's a Monday, we can start voting in person by absentee. And I think that that's where we ought to be organizing this campaign this year. That way, we can make up for the fact that a lot of older people who have been working the polls for years and are reluctant now because of the virus, we can get people to social distancing and doing what is necessary to vote early. We are asking churches, and I want to repeat that. We are asking churches, synagogues, temples, mosques to adopt precincts, whatever precinct your sanctuary is located in. Adopt that as a precinct that you're going to get your members to make sure that everybody in that precinct goes out to vote and vote early absentee. That's the only way we're going to win this election. We want every fraternity, every sorority. The mayor is a Kappa, I'm an Omega, but I've told everybody between now and November 4th, I'm an AKA. That's what Kamala Harris is. I'm an AKA.
Ski wee, Sarah.
I've already got a text from Kamala addressing me as Sarah. That's what we got to do, man. You know, the HBCUs, we got 80 in South Carolina. They ought to be thinking about their future. 7 of them up in my district. Yeah, I'm a proud South Carolina State Bulldog. But I've told them I'm a Howard Bison until November 4th. We got to put aside whatever may be our differences. Put them aside. Pick them back up on November 4th. But let's go to work now adopting these precincts. And I'll close with this. My dad was a fundamentalist minister. I grew up in the parsonage of the Church of God. There in Columbia, the Clement Road, the Church of God, they used to be on Pendleton Street when I was a kid. My dad had 3 books he kept in the pulpit with him. One was the Bible, one was a hymnal, and the other was a little book that he put together. My dad kept a book that he put together of every registered voter in our precinct. And when election day came around, he would knock on doors to turn every one of those voters out. And this whole thing that people are talking about now, the church can't do this and the church can't do that, that's just not true. 501c3 status says you cannot use your pulpit to tell people how to vote, but you can use your personhood outside of the pulpit to tell people how to vote, and you can use your pulpit to tell people to vote. You can't tell them who to vote for, but you can tell them from the pulpit to vote. And we got to get everybody involved in this election, because this is going to be the most consequential election since 1860. 1860, the year that Abraham Lincoln was elected president, and it changed the fortunes of black people. Because he got elected, he wrote the Emancipation Proclamation in 1862. It became effective, well, 2 Emancipation Proclamations, one for the District of Columbia and the other for the other slave states that came into effect January 1, 1863. This one has the consequences of turning the clock back on all of that. The most consequential since 1860, and I don't believe there's a single soul alive who can argue to the contrary successfully.
Thank you so much.
You know, Simmons, just following up on what he said in the question. Every election we've won, and I've been fortunate enough to be a part of them, since Donald Trump has taken office, in places where people had no idea Democrats could win, starting in Alabama. Jamie, we got sent to Alabama with no money, thanks to somebody else on this program here tonight. I won't call no names, Majority Whip Jim Clyburn. We got sent to Alabama, but we implemented Adopt a Precinct. We got churches involved. The election was won before Election Day, so while everybody on TV was looking at some of the counties and saying, well, we don't know how this is going to play out because these counties have not come in yet, the reason we were successful is because we had those votes in the bag already. Louisiana, a Democratic governor, nobody thought that was possible. Kentucky, a Democratic governor, nobody thought that was possible. Virginia, in the 2018 midterms, we went around the country. You know this. You were heavily involved. 42 races across the country. We implemented Adopt a Precinct program with a heavy emphasis on an early voting strategy. As a result, we have the most diverse majority in our nation's history in the U.S. Congress, and Jim Clyburn is the highest ranking African American in the U.S. Congress. So we know putting votes in the bank early, it has long-term benefits for us in particular and those who care about our issues.
Thank you. I have a question. I want to kind of stir up the pot here a little bit.
Like a good preacher would.
Yeah. Because, and the reason why I'm doing this is not to cause friction with the panelists, but to cause a friction so that people can understand the importance of this. So you have those who say, I'm for Trump, President Donald Trump. Okay. And you have those who say, I'm for Biden. Of course, everyone here on the panel is Democratic. Why do you believe that Vice President Biden is the best candidate? And so I'm going to give this to Jamie Harrison, if you don't mind. I'm going to let you start here because I haven't heard you in a while. Why do you think Vice President Joe Biden is the better candidate?
Well, I think, listen, I've endorsed the vice president, and I think he's going to be an important ally. But I think Jim Clyburn said it perfectly. Joe Biden knows us. He knows South Carolina. You know, when you think about some of the darkest times that you had, and you think about the people who come to your aid during those darkest times, one of our darkest times that we had, and all of us on this panel were touched by it, was the Mother Emanuel massacre. And we all recalled, you know, Joe Biden coming down here with Barack Obama, but Joe Biden came to worship. with the Mother Emanuel Church, even prior to Barack Obama coming down here and singing Amazing Grace. And he and his wife, Dr. Biden, did it in a way that was quiet, no fanfare or what have you. And they were there because they knew the pain of that community. They knew the pain of that church because they had experienced that pain on their own. And so he was there during our dark time. And he was also there. Many people probably don't even know this. The Port of Charleston right now is being dredged, getting down to 55 feet. Folks don't understand that it was Jim Clyburn talking to Joe Biden, and then Joe Biden going to Barack Obama saying, we need to make sure that this port is in your budget, Mr. President, because Savannah, which is our #1 competitor in terms of port activity in this region, was already set to begin dredging. And we would have lost billions of dollars in terms of our competitiveness to Savannah had it not been for Jim Clyburn going to Joe Biden, going to Barack Obama, and getting that process started. And so this is a man who has been invested in this state for a very, very long time and has had impact on the lives of people, even when those folks didn't even know. And so, I really do believe, and even at the end, you say, well, I don't know him, and I don't know President Trump. Well, you know Steve Benjamin. You know Antoine Seawright. You know Jim Clyburn. You know that these are people and men that you can trust because they have had your back through thick and thin. So at the very least, you say, I don't know Biden, I don't know Trump. Well, you do know some folks who you do trust. Follow their judgment, and they won't lead you wrong.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to add anything to that?
Yeah, if I may.
Yes, sir.
You didn't mention this, but Joe Biden spends more time and has over the years spent more time in South Carolina than any other place outside of Delaware. And people would run into Joe Biden in a restaurant in Charleston, Joe and Jill, because they vacation, all of their spare time is spent in South Carolina. And that's why I referred to him on the night that I spoke at the opening of the convention as South Carolina's adopted son, because he has adopted South Carolina as his second home state.
Thank you. There is a question from a young engaged voter. He says, I believe that climate change is one of the major threats affecting African American community, especially Black folks living along the South Carolina coast. What is the plan to fight major climate shifts in order to combat environmental racism?
Well, in order to actually fight the existential threat, there are a few, prior to this year, I'd say there are a couple of clear existential threats to human life, one being climate change and the other one being nuclear war. I think now we're seeing the combination of all these other forces that we're dealing with right now. But in order to fight climate change, you can call them wet weather events, you can call them whatever you want to call them. Science shows that the Earth is warming at a rate that not only helps cause and continue these amazing forest fires that we're seeing, but we're seeing everything from the erosion of the oceans, the heating up the oceans that turns these tropical storms into hurricanes at a rapid clip. We saw the effects of that in 2015 in very stark terms, billions of dollars of damage, hundreds of roads destroyed. 6,000 calls on the first day to 911 and 19 precious lives lost. We saw what was expected to be a 100-year event turn into a 1,000-year event immediately. But in order to fight climate change, you actually have to believe that it is real. Joe Biden has actually been working to fight climate change for years. Donald Trump still does not believe that it is real. And that doesn't just apply to Joe Biden. I mean, obviously the historic opportunity that Jamie Harrison has here before him. I remember very well post 2015, spending as much time with Congressman Clyburn as we were working through the devastation of the storms, and then the years after that, when the policy making actually becomes real. Jim Clyburn got inserted into legislation $169 million, I believe it was, to repair the damaged levee wall and make sure that the central source of water that feeds people all across Columbia and Lexington County, our hospitals, our forts, our colleges, universities, our HBCUs, to make sure that that money was in our budget. Joe Wilson voted against it in the House, but Jim Clyburn, as he has so many times shepherded it through, it went over to the Senate, and Lindsey Graham and others took it out. And obviously we are where we are, where we're piecemealing together a solution with the support of the congressman. I say that to say, in order, if you're going to fight climate change, which is real and devastating communities all across this country, the calls for environmental justice are very real. You have to have real policymakers there. So you got to have one in the White House. You got to have soldiers in the House of Representatives, where our majority whip is, and you got to make sure you got folks like Jamie Harris in there who actually believe in the reality of climate change. It is real, and it affects Black and brown communities and poor communities more so than anyone else in this country.
Thank you. I have another question. It says, can we talk about the importance of filling out the census? Does anyone want to answer that question?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's very, very important. In fact, I talked to Antoine earlier today.
Yes, sir.
We are putting together, I'm purchasing thousands of dollars worth of radio ads. I'm doing robocalls that we're going to start tomorrow. And people to please fill out that census. And it's important that you do, because although I may enjoy what I do, I think I could do a better job if I knew how many people lived in the 6th Congressional District, how many hospitals are needed, how many schools are needed, and how many housing units are needed, and where they're needed. If you don't fill out the census, when it comes to appropriations, you don't exist. Because when we start putting together appropriation bills, we are able to put money in there based upon the needs that have been established in your communities. So when people fail to fill out the census, they aren't being counted, and their needs are not taken into account. When I say I need X, and they say to me, we got the records here, and according to the records, you don't have that many people in your congressional district, and therefore you don't need that kind of money. So if you don't get counted, you will get cut out of services. And let me say this, Donald Trump knows that. He just cut 30 days off of the response time. We were supposed to have until October 31st to get the census done. He cut it back to September the 30th. And there's a big headline in the newspaper yesterday saying, why is it that Donald Trump wants to get a bad count on the census? That's why. So let me say to all those African-American men, that 13% especially, you are being cut out of the census. So those other things I talked about can't touch you, then maybe you'll get touched by getting cut out of the census when we're trying to get water systems into areas, when we're trying to get schools built, we're trying to get Medicaid and other healthcare resources in the communities. The census is very important, and we only got 2 weeks left to get it done.
And Congressman Clyburn will tell you this is the very first time we've ever had the President of the United States fighting us on getting an accurate count. We've always endeavored to have an accurate count. Every point that we do not count is $40 million in funding over the next 10 years. So you think about that. Right now, I think we're lagging about 60% accuracy in the count. So we're talking about billions of dollars that would go to those critical infrastructure issues, our schools, our hospital systems, our roads, clean water, all the things that matter, economic development decisions about where people want to place jobs. All of this is based on having an accurate count. So it takes 10 minutes, y'all. You ain't got to leave you home. 10 minutes to be counted. So we need to encourage everyone to stand up and be counted in the census.
Thank you. Someone asked about talking about the down ballot races. So, Antoine, you want to talk about that quickly?
Yeah, so when we hear people say this is the most consequential election of our lifetime, there are a couple of reasons people say that. One, the next president will appoint judges to the federal bench that will be there for a lifetime. Hopefully, Jamie Harrison will be there to confirm judges appointed by Joe Biden. That will supersede Trump or any other president for the next 50, 60 years. The judges he's appointing, Donald Trump, are in the early 40s, late 30s, never tried cases in some cases, but they will be there for a lifetime. Consequential. The other part about this election, more so than any other election in modern history, is that whoever wins down the ballot. So you have the president, vice president, you have Jamie on the ballot, Clyburn on the ballot, but you also have state legislative races, county council races, and some places, city council races, sheriff races, school board races. All those things are important. Whoever wins state house races and governor's races and state senate races in this country will control the tone and temperature for the next 10 years because they will redraw the lines. I cannot tell you, Pastor, how important that is for this little democracy that we pray will stay together over the next 10 years. They will determine what Jim Clyburn's congressional district looked like. They will determine what the first congressional districts look like. All these things are predicated on how well we do down the ballot. When you have an issue with your child, you can't call your mayor, you have to call your school board member. If your trash is not picked up, please call your mayor if you live in the city. If not, you have to call your county council person. If crime is an issue and you live in the county, you have to call your sheriffs. So when people start talking about the ballot, we have to make sure they know about the entire ballot. And sometimes that means not just going in there pressing the lever, because in South Carolina, school board races are nonpartisan. So you have to go all the way to the bottom and pick your choice for some of these races that matter. Those things are even more critical sometimes than some of the topic ticket. And I'll tell you, and I'll end with this, as Bill Clinton once said to me, he says, the closer your government is to you, the more important it is for you. And so that's why these down ballot races and these local races matter just as much as some of the federal races.
We got two more questions. You got to give me 4 minutes, and we'll conclude here. One question is, someone has asked, does Black Lives Matter in South Carolina? I mean, we're all black. I think the answer to that would be yes. But what should we do to let African Americans know that we are there for them?
Absolutely. I mean, the African seed and the American sun helped build this country. And we've got to make sure that, particularly as it relates to our systems of justice, that we build transparent, accountable, responsive systems of justice. And that's something that America has to work on aggressively. We've been doing it here in the city, in this county, but so much more has to be done. And obviously, Jamie, I think you're going to say something about federal leadership.
No, listen, we need the federal leadership on this, and we've seen the leadership from the House of Representatives. They passed a really strong bill, which tackled the issue of qualified immunity, that tackled banning chokeholds, but it also established a registry for those bad apples in law enforcement to make sure that we are tracking folks so that you can't go and tread on the civil rights of folks in New York and then come down here to South Carolina and get a whole nother job and nobody know your history and your background. Those are things that are really, really important right now. And what we see in the Senate is a lot of lip service. They didn't even have any hearings. There was no discussion. They just wanted to rush a bill to the floor and gave it to Tim Scott to usher it in. Lindsey Graham's the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee. And this guy seemed to just be disconnected in terms of the experience, the lived experience that many members of his own folks in his own state were going through. Well, we need some folks who understand that this is not a new pain. The only thing that is different and is new is that we got these things, these cell phones, and they're showcasing what's going on. This is a historical pain that's been passed on from generation to generation to generation. I mean, just look back to the Orangeburg massacre and what happened there for folks who treaded on the lives of folks and there was no repercussions. In essence, what we want to make sure is that justice is just, that we're not asking for anything more. We're not asking to be treated any differently from anybody else. We're just asking for equality. for equity in that. And nobody is going around, this idea that Lindsay and some of these folks are saying, oh, Democrats just want to defund the police. Listen, my grandpa Ron was a longtime member of the Detroit Police Department. I have 2 cousins that have been in law enforcement. I know the perils of having family members who are in law enforcement and they leave and come back and you just hope and pray that they come back home. We all understand that. But at the same time, we also understand that there's some things that are going on that aren't right. And that we should not, nobody should be fearful of driving their car and worried about getting pulled over and thinking, oh, Lord, will I lose my life as a result of it? That should not be a fear that any of us should have. But it is the fear. It is the reality of the situation for so many, and that is what we have to change. And so, you got to be clear. Yes, Black Lives Matter. We know it. That we know they matter. We need, and it's good to see that it's not just Black folks that are now saying that. You look at these protests, and the protests look like America, and that's something that's been very different from protests in the past. And so, we got to keep pushing, but we got to make sure that we got folks in office who are going to give more than just lip service to this. They're actually going to do something about it.
Got you. Thank you. This is the last question that we will take tonight. And this one I'm asking this question because it is a conversation amongst Black voters, especially Black men. So I want to read this question. And Representative Clyburn, I want to ask you to take this first. And if any of the other gentlemen on the platform would like to take it, you can. This is the question. There are some Black voters who have reservations about Senator Kamala Harris because of her history as a prosecutor. What can you say to the voting public to reassure them that she will support equal justice for all citizens?
Well, thank you very much for that question. I say to people all the time, when we have our children, our grandchildren growing up with certain aspirations, and if they decide they wanted to go into law enforcement, want to be a prosecutor, or as in Val Demings' case, she went on to be chief of police. We should not hold it against people for excelling in the professions that they pursue. Kamala Harris was a prosecutor, and people are saying that because she was a prosecutor, that disqualifies her. No, we have asked our people of color to be in these positions so they can help elevate the position, help demonstrate how the positions should exist. That's almost like saying because we've had Congress people who were racist, who wanted second-class citizenship for Black people, that I shouldn't become a congressperson. I became a congressperson in order to help improve the position. And that's what Kamala did. So I would say to those young people, look at her record as a prosecutor, not the fact that she held a job that's there to prosecute people, because somebody is going to be in the position. It's best to have somebody who is sensitive to your dreams and aspirations and sensitive to your background and experiences. I've always said we can be no more and we'll never be any less than what our experiences allow us to be. And if you can take those experiences, whatever job it is that you've got, mayor of Columbia, a consultant on political issues, or in the United States Senate, take those experiences with you, let them inform you, and I think you will be exactly what the doctor ordered.
Thank you. Anyone else would like to make a comment on that?
When we show up to vote for Kamala Harris, we're voting for a mother. For me, it's a Black woman who looked like my sharecropping grandmothers. It's somebody who my niece could one day be. It's somebody who looked like my sister. In spite of what differences people may have or have had with Kamala Harris or anybody else on the Democratic ticket, for me, they do not compare to the differences we have with Mike Pence and Donald Trump. And we have two choices in November: Pence and Trump, Harris and Biden. it's crystal clear for me. And so we can get distracted and try to get cute and worry about things that's chatter on the internet, or we can stay laser focused and help improve the American experiment for generations to come. Because believe it or not, Pastor, and I think everybody else on this panel know this election is about life and death. This is serious business. Whoever wins in November literally will make decisions that will determine the life or death of people and their communities. And so when I see Kamala Harris, I see somebody who's going to fight for things that matter to me in the short and the long term. And I think we just have to stay focused. And finally, I'll say this. The biggest bit of disinformation by the foreign actors in 2016 was this idea that Hillary Clinton locked up black men because of the 94 crime bill. That's been proven in fact. Anybody who don't believe me, go Google it. That was the biggest talking point pushed by the Russians in 2016. The campaign in 2020 is no different. That's why you're starting to hear some of the same conversations about the 94 crime bill and Kamala Harris. Believe it or not, that's all disinformation, misinformation. Where I'm from, we call it lies being pushed on the internet for people who have an agenda. We can't be distracted by that. The worst voter you can be is a misinformed or non-informed voter. And I think we just have to make sure that we stay laser focused on the big picture and not get distracted by the small stuff.
Thank you. Listen, and with that, that's why we did the panel. We wanted to make sure that we could give you information that would arm you on how to go to the polls. And so what I want to do is encourage you to vote. Make sure you complete the census. Make sure you, as Representative Clyburn said, make sure you vote early. Make sure you do that as soon as the polls open. You want to make sure you mail that in. You want to do your part because your voice matters. And so I want to thank everyone who is a part of our panel tonight. Thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule. Mr. Harrison, I know you have another event you have to go to, so thank you so much for being with us tonight. Representative Clyburn, Mayor Benjamin, Antoine C. Wright, thank you so much. Make sure you register to vote. This is part one. I want to make sure that you join us part two on September 29th at 7 p.m. Listen, thank you so much, and you have a great evening.
Good night, everybody.
Yes.